I'd like now to introduce tonight's speaker, Lucy Jane Santos, who is a writer, a presenter, a consultant, an independent scholar, who work ranges across beauty, science, technology, popular entertainment, and nightlife. And in fact, I know some of Lucy's work from Kim Walker and my interest in the history of a gin and tonic, because you published a little bit of work on the history of the cocktail, a frequent visitor on a participant on radio and television. And I believe that tonight's talk will draw on some of the work in two of your books on radioactive topics, half-lives, the unlikely history of radium, and chain reactions, a hopeful history of uranium, exploring the unexpected ways in which radioactivity has entered everyday life. And then you've got a book forthcoming as well, Nobody's Perfect, absolutely one of my favorite movies, The Making of Some Like It Hot, which will be published later this year. So we're really looking forward to your talk, Lucy. We invite you to share your screen and to kick off.
Thank you so much. I mean, you've said you're not expecting any technical problems. I've had nothing but technical problems today, so we'll see how it goes. Let's see. Okay, so I'm hoping you can see my screen. Um, wow. Okay, so it's quite a big topic we're going to be talking about today, but we're going to do it sort of in order. So we're going to start with uranium, then we're going to move on to the discovery of radioactivity, radium, and the new medicinal life that uranium gets in the atomic age. And then we're finally going to briefly just bring us sort of up to date with looking a little bit about radioisotopes and a tiny bit about radiotherapy today. So the first thing I always say is, well, we're going to cover a lot, but we're not going to go all the way back into history, or at least all the way back into uranium history in depth, because it is, after all, one of the heavy elements that originated when two neutron stars collided about 80 million years before the birth of the solar system. Those collisions even, flung uranium along with other stardust across the universe. Eventually, they condensed and formed planets, including our own. So uranium, therefore, is an integral part of our planet's composition and one of the most common elements in the Earth's crust. Ooh, here we go. So uranium's natural life cycle, which we will touch on again later, led to slow radioactive decay, which is the main heat source within the core of our planet. And as I said, uranium is a very, very common element and it exists everywhere. So it's really abundant in the Earth's crust. And in fact, there are over 200 known uranium minerals with names like carnotite, torbanite, and pitchblende. Yes, it's everywhere is what I'm saying. Now there are obviously there's always this bit of the talk makes me laugh because we start off how many millions of years ago, and I've just summarized here saying now there's obviously many years between the Earth forming and what we're going to be talking about tonight. And as I said, I don't want to summarize all of them. Now it's likely that uranium was known to people throughout history. And now, after all, many of those 200 known minerals are to be found very close to the Earth's surface. They're pretty visible and awfully pretty in many cases, bright. We can see a few of them here. But actually, we don't know too much about people's interaction with uranium and how it was used. So I always, at this point, fast forward to the 1780s. So we get this guy, Martin Klaproth, a self-taught expert in analysing minerals, arguably the founder of the new science of analytical chemistry. Now, one of his discoveries involved investigating two uranium minerals, so pitchblende and torbanite. So pitchblende is the one that we are going to keep touching on tonight because it is one of the most important in this history. Again, we don't need to go into too much details of the chemical aspect of this, but he took his sample of pitchblende. You can see a photograph of what that looks like here. He dissolved the ore in nitric acid and neutralized the solution with sodium hydroxide. He found within this a yellow compound that he heated with charcoal to obtain a black powder. His experiments determined that the sample was chemically indivisible, i.e., you couldn't separate anything else from it. Now, he was convinced that he'd discovered a new element, and he announced this on the 24th of September, 1789. He said the number of known metals has been increased by one from 17 to 18. This I've called a metalloid, a new element which I see as a strange kind of half metal. And he named it uranium. Now, as it turns out, what he'd actually found was a compound. So this is uranium oxide, a mixture of uranium and oxygen. It wouldn't be until the 1840s that pure uranium was isolated. But since Klaproth's announcement, uranium itself starts becoming used medicinally and commercially, and it starts becoming a desirable thing. So we see uranium mines being established. The earliest one that's in England was actually in Cornwall, and the first date of that being an established uranium mine, i.e., they are mining for uranium specifically, dates back to 1805. Now, one of the most iconic, I guess you could say, uses of uranium oxide is as a colorizing agent in glassmaking, and we get that from about the 1830s. Now, commercially available uranium glass is wide. There's a wide circulation of uranium glass from around about the 1850s. And we get many different shades of uranium glass as well, with that yellowish green effect becoming the most popular choice. Much later, it becomes popularly known as Vaseline glass due to its supposed resemblance to the famous brand of petroleum jelly. Now, as I said, there's lots of different uranium glasses at this point, and they're being used for all sorts of things. So you can find, I mean, there's plenty of examples. I just chose a few here. So we've got the sort of classic vase at the top, and we've got some more medical looking ones as well. So it was widely used in medicines and chemists. Now, all of this is really just setting our context because we want to get to the meat of the story, and that's more the actual medical uses in various forms. I should say that the uranium glass here is just being used for its effect, its pretty colour, rather than any sort of thought of it being medicinal or any sort of beneficial effects. So, when we come to the next bit of it, now this, as I said, is more the crux of our story, isn't it? So it was noted that uranium as a metal was toxic. So uranium oxide finds its place along with other salts of other metallic substances as potentially important weapons against disease and illness. I'm sure, considering the audience that I'm talking tonight, we don't need to go into that too much about why, but it is here the idea that a poison in the body is best cured by a similar poison. Now, uranium also was used in this way, originally by a professor in Germany called Christian Gemlin, I think is how you pronounce it. He publishes a treatise in 1824 that describes the physiological effects of uranium. Now, he is talking about in both humans and animals, and it's not just uranium he's looking at different metallic salts as well, but of the 18 that he's investigating, uranium is one of them. When he was looking at how uranium affected people and animals, as I said, he fed uranium salts to dogs and rabbits. This was in different ways and different dosages. Of course, this is a very experimental procedure at this time. So he's studying its effects. Now, he concludes that uranium is a feeble poison when it's consumed, but administered through intravenous injection, it proves swiftly fatal. There's lots of research going around at this point into the use of uranium. And largely, he's looking at how it could be used for diabetics as well. Obviously, this is pre-insulin, pre any treatments. So they're looking at the effects of induced nephritis as well, which is a kidney disease. So this is another experimenter in Paris looking at giving dogs small doses of the uranium compound. So we see lots of different treatments and lots of different experimentation at this point, and of course with varying degrees of success. Crucially here, especially when you're looking at kidney diseases and diabetes, there's a complete reversal of any positive success when the treatment is stopped. Now, whilst it's very much not conclusive about kidney disease or diabetes, we do start seeing a more home-based market for uranium treatments, both for diabetes, but also a wide variety of ailments. So we start seeing it everywhere, actually, and it's really interesting to track the use of uranium in this way. So chemist and druggist, I've forgotten the year of it, I think it's around about 1850. They had a recipe. I found a recipe in one of their journals, talking. It was a recipe for snuff. So snuff, a kind of smokeless tobacco. In this particular recipe that they were talking about, it was one grain of uranium acetate and mixed with coffee, and this was said to be the latest cure for cold in the head. We also have uranium tabloids or uranium nitrate tabloids produced by Burroughs and Wellcome. These are on sale well into the 20th century. Oppenheimer, Sons and Co. of London sells palatinoids containing 2.5 grains of uranium nitrate. The idea with these is that they could be swallowed whole or crushed into a handkerchief and inhaled. These were said to be for the treatment of diabetes, but without the repugnant flavour of some others. Another form of treatment here is a medicated uranium wine. Each 24 fluid ounce bottle of this came with a book. We can see a little copy of one of the versions of this book here. It's called Diabetes and Its Cure. Now, uranium wine was described as a powerful elixir that would instantly quench thirst, restore strength, and improve bodily functions. It was said that breathing difficulties, fatigue, and lassitude were also said to be alleviated. It even claimed that patients who drank it would experience significant improvements in both their appearance and their temperament. The dosage of this was suggested as 3 small sherry glasses per day, with or without water, 5 minutes before or immediately after meals, and at night before bedtime. Now, this is a very brief look at the way that uranium started being used medicinally. And as I said, it's mostly around diabetes, but also around exhaustion and fatigue. All of these are very uh, well, diabetes, obviously pre-insulin, there's no treatment for it. And fatigue and lassitude and all of those things are things that people are very concerned about in this period. Now, it wouldn't be, and it was around about the 1930s actually that this medicinal or medical use of uranium was completely over. And uranium falls off our radar for a while, but we will come back to it. It's still used in other things. It's used in photography, so in the form of its metal salts. It was used to help with toning. We see it being used in scientific experimentation as well, largely that with the uranium glass, I have to say. Again, it's such a pretty colour. People were using it for all sorts of reasons. But it would take some other discoveries before it would become popular and back into medical use once again. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned one of the most famous properties of uranium, and that is its radioactivity. And that's because it hadn't been discovered yet. I do feel this is rather a cheat of my title because it was Radioactive Remedies, and they're not trading on the radioactive properties, of course, until now. Now, it's really always hard to know where to pitch these talks. I obviously know that we've got a lot of people from the society here, but I also saw on the attendance list as well, lots of people who I know are very interested in uranium and radioactivity. So I'm just going to be very brief at this section. So the root of radioactivity is the discovery and the interest in a plethora of rays that are discovered in the 19th century. Um, So specifically, we start off with Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery of a new kind of invisible rays, the X-ray, in late 1895, as well as their use in diagnostics. Of course, this is very useful. For the first time, it's possible to see inside the human body without cutting into it. Other than allowing physicians to examine patients for broken bones, the X-ray photographs were also particularly useful for locating objects inside the body as an aid to their extraction. Now, once X-rays had been identified, other scientists were keen to see if this type of radiation could be found anywhere else, so started to investigate. And while Röntgen was generating his X-rays using a machine, Henri Becquerel was interested in whether X-rays were produced in nature or a similar type of ray would be produced in nature. He thought it likely that luminescent materials, i.e. materials that emit light when hit by sunlight, might also emit X-rays. And again, keeping this ticking along, he discovers what becomes known as the phenomenon of radioactivity, and this was while testing samples of uranium. Marie Curie along with her husband Pierre, carried on Becquerel's research. And it was confirmed that both uranium and thorium, two already known elements, were radioactive. They emitted this radioactivity. And they were testing lots of minerals at this time. But Marie Curie was particularly interested in that pitch blend that we've already discussed, that uranium-based ore. And if you remember, it's one of the minerals that Klaproth investigated when he was working on his discovery of what became uranium oxide. Um, Now, in particular, the pitch blend they were working on was found in the mountains in what is now the Czech Republic, in a town known as Yakimov now. Now, pitchblende itself is a complex and impure mineral made up of 30 different elements. It gave off more radioactivity than could be counted or be accounted for by the known uranium content. So, Marie Curie and Pierre Curie believed that there were more radioactive elements to be found within their samples of pitchblende. Now, to isolate those components, the Curies adopted a method of analysis known as fractionalized crystallization, which is various chemical procedures to separate the substance into distinct parts, i.e. fractions. The pitchblende was ground, dissolved, boiled, stirred, filtered, poured, and cooled. And in 1898, they identified two new elements from it, polonium and radium. This is my sort of fun little slide because this is where the science behind all of this can get incredibly complicated, and I want to get on to the more fun aspects. So we have this poem, which is attributed rather shadily, probably, to Sir William Ramsay. So the atoms in turn we now clearly discern fly to bits with the utmost facility. They wend on their way and in splitting display an absolute lack of stability. Now, this is in reference to the fact that it was discovered that those elements, those radioactive elements, were spontaneously changing into different substances, a process that comes to be known as atomic disintegration. And at the same time, they're emitting rays, alpha, beta, and gamma, again, with different properties. So all of this is obviously all very new. And what we see is scientists and in turn medical practitioners and entrepreneurs are really struggling to understand the complicated property of radioactivity of these new elements. And they did behave very strangely indeed. So we've got several of these radioactive elements at the moment. We've got uranium, which we will talk about again. Thorium, which isn't one that I'm going to talk about tonight, but again has another fascinating history. And then we have radium and polonium. So we're going to focus on radium. Now, as I said, they were really struggling to work out what to do with the radium and to understand what it was doing in itself. Other than well, they also found out that radium had a very special property. Now, the substance that the Curies and the other scientists were working with at this time was radium salts, chloride and bromide. And they realized that whilst they looked like common salts in the daytime, at night they glowed in the dark. And it was this illuminating property that really came to be associated with radium, both at the time and now as well. And it started to be used in various products like glow-in-the-dark watches. The image that we've got right at the top there of the chorus line of dancers here is from a production called Piff Paff Puff in 1904. It was on Broadway and then toured around the US. And this was the pony ballet, the English pony ballet, performing the radium dance. And you can see that, although you can't probably see, but all of those costumes are glow in the dark as well. They darkened the stage and all of those little white bits were made out of glow-in-the-dark paint. Whether or not it was a radium paint, probably not. But it was definitely a glow-in-the-dark substance that they were associated with radium. Keeping back more into our medical uses, it was realized that if you carried a vial of salts, radium salts in your pocket, it would burn through your skin and your clothes. Henri Becquerel and Pierre Curie both reported this. William Crookes reported that he had a nasty blister in his side. And people were carrying it because it was so rare at the time. They were literally sharing it between the different laboratories. So Pierre Curie took across a vial to the Royal Society, I believe, kept it in his pocket, all from Paris. So we see all of this being shared at this time. But it was that burning that led to the next use of radium, and that was because, well, actually, let's track back a little bit because we need to go back to X-rays. So X-rays used diagnostically very quickly, those shadow photographs looking at the broken bones and locating objects. But experimenters who were using it were also reporting skin reddening, blistering, and their skin shedding off. And of course, it was the idea here that if it was doing that to healthy skin, what could it do to unhealthy skin? So we start seeing early experimenters using it to treat skin diseases and literally burning off external tumours. There'd been some success with that, so we now start seeing radium. Radium had similar burning properties, it seemed. So let's use radium and see how that works. So radium's used for moles, birthmarks, and cancers. It has various advantages over X-rays. You don't need a generator, you just need access to the salts. And if you had a vial of the salts, you could insert it deep into the body and tackle deep-seated tumours. We see radium therapy or Curie therapy, both terminology is used at this point. It's developing empirically. People are experimenting and finding out what works and what doesn't. And it's considered to be a super medicine. But then we also see it being used in slightly different ways, because of course there's lots of interest in the use of it, not just literally burning things off, but looking at different ways that it can be used to affect the body. So here we've got Professor William J. Morton. He's a pioneer of X-ray therapies, and then he becomes interested in radium. Now, this is 1904. He becomes interested, as I said, in the use of radium in various ways, and he's looking at it as a treatment to cure cancer. He claims in January, February 1904, that he'd cured 3 people. Now, his treatment, and we can see 2 different forms of treatment here, is a treatment of radioactivity, either in the form of X-rays or radium salts, water, and light. Here, the idea is that you would drink a mixture of water and quinine. Quinine is a substance that glows when exposed to UV light. And also, as Morton said, it would glow when exposed to radium. So the idea is that you drink that mixture, give it 15 minutes to absorb into the bloodstream, and then you're exposed to a form of radioactivity, and this would activate the fluorescence inside of you. So the first larger image is just someone standing in front of an X-ray machine. That's the activating. The second image where you can see someone holding a cup to their head. Now this is a glass cup with radium salt suspended in it. And the idea here is that you place it on the part of the body that you wish to treat. 15 minutes a day, 3 times a week. Now, this was said to bathe the inside of the body with sunshine, and this is why this treatment is called liquid sunshine. The theory here is that the fluorescing would kill the bacteria that was thought to cause disease, a very prevalent theory at the time. And now, Morton's theory, it seemed, as I said, he claimed that he had cured 3 people through this. Now, it was ultimately discredited the following year, but we see the interest in it still remaining. And we can see here liquid sunshine, and we've got Dr. Gardner here and his radium cures. Now we see, we see here Gardner taking that idea, taking Morton's idea of liquid sunshine and registering it himself in 1904 for use in beverages. So we can see here liquid sunshine for beverages is Lester D. Gardner. of New York. I'm not sure the next advert here is also 1904. It says Dr. Gardner. They're both in New York. They're both talking about radium cures around about the same time. I haven't actually been able to absolutely definitively and confirm that they are the same person. But again, it's used here to illustrate the idea that this liquid sunshine, these radium cures, are something that becomes much more widely available. In 1903, 1904, we see other uses of the word radium for various medical preparations. We have Thomas Groshurt in London filing a patent for preparations of the hair, the name radium. We see in Ohio a patent being taken out for radium in soap as well. And we see lots of different other products being produced at this time as well. Now, one of the problems here is establishing radium as as establishing a market for radium in medicinal, in consumer products, because as I said earlier, at this point, it's still one of the most rarest substances in the world. As I said, you've got Pierre Curie bringing his radium across to the Royal Society. This isn't stuff that people have a huge amount of access to. You basically need to have an in to get some at this point. William Morton is actually quite an interesting example of someone who potentially did have access to radium salts. Now, he was the brother-in-law of William J. Hammer, who works with Thomas Edison, and there's lots of links that I'm absolutely desperately trying to work out. Whether through Edison he would have been able to have access to radium salts, or whether it was just a bit of flim-flam. Lester Gardner knew William Morton as well. So again, it's just looking at these patterns to see whether I can establish whether they actually had access to these salts. It's kind of doubtful, probably best if they didn't, but yes. But I think there would be very little expectation really, or with anyone with any particular understanding of the of radium, that any of these products would actually contain radium. Even those radium glow in the dark theatrical costumes, incredibly unlikely that they were actually radioactive or had any sort of radium in there. Although there still is that link. This is Lester Gardner again. If I could just trace him, I'm sure I could solve all of these mysteries. Anyway. We're going to go back on, and we're just going to say that it's really something that these early products, they're associating themselves with this new form of science, this new excitement of radioactivity, and this idea that radium can cure things. So we start seeing people wanting to get in on that, of course. Now, the waters get a bit more muddied here with a fuller understanding of the radioactive decay process. Again, this is a very big overview. I don't want to go into too much detail, but we're going to look at radon here. Actually, we're going to start moving a little bit to radon. So it's a colourless, odourless, and tasteless gas, and is formed as part of the radioactive decay process, whereby uranium, in this particular instance, decays into radium and radon. Again, I'm oversimplifying it. If you could have a proper look at this World Nuclear Association radioactive decay in thorium and uranium series. But if we just think about radon, so scientists have worked out that you could capture the gas in sealed glass vessels, and then you could use it as an inhalation treatment or to turn things radioactive, which potentially makes it more believable that radium products may actually contain some form of radioactivity, radon at least. Now, whilst treatments with actual radium salts had led to Curie therapy, there was another form of therapy that developed around the same time, mild radium therapy. And proponents of MRT argued that exposure to radium in small doses caused a small amount of stress to biological organisms, which would trigger a chain of physiological reactions that would work as a potent metabolic catalyst. And this would improve all sorts of things: joint movements, blood circulation, boost the immune system, stimulate tissue regeneration, a huge host of positive changes. Now, the popularity of MRT as a theory really does get a boost when it was determined that water could be naturally radioactive, because wherever deposits of uranium rocks were found, you would find radon in particular. Now, radon, because it was a gas, could be easily released into the environment through human disturbances such as mining or by escaping through natural cracks in the ground, where it would emerge into the surface or into water. So we start seeing spa towns all over the world advertising taking advantage of the popularity of radium, and they're advertising that their waters contain it. Um, no, you could visit a spa town. So we have spa towns in the UK. Bath and Buxton were all over this. They were talking about how their waters were full of radium. They were talking about how they were competing against each other to say how much radium they had in their waters, and which one was the radium spa town. Which one had the most potent water. I didn't want to focus on that tonight because I wanted to talk more about take-home products, things that you could buy in shops. So, like I said, you could go to Bath and Buxton, or you could buy radium water. So we can see here in the middle. So we've got radium water from the Bungalow Hotel in Oklahoma. In the middle, we've got this image of Buxton radioactive water. This is just telling us that from 1937, the bottling of the Buxton radioactive water and the distribution of it will be taken over by the Buxton Spa Water Company. And they advertise at the bottom, British water for British whiskey. It's worth saying this is Buxton water. This is the same company that, or different variations of the company, the same source, the same water that's still being sold when you go to WH Smith's or somewhere today. This is Buxton water. And we also have here as well Sulis water from the pump room at Bath, attainable at Harrods and all over leading stores and wine merchants. Now, again, this is all about the curativeness of it. So we can see here for the Sulis water, it's exceptional value to anyone who suffers from any form of rheumatism. Again, quite surprising that I found it when I first started doing this research. I was quite surprising they were so open about their radioactive waters. It sounded so bizarre to me, but yes, these are being heavily advertised. It didn't have to be related to a spa company or spa town. You could buy radium water, for instance, from Ambrac Nelson and Company, a homeopathic pharmacy. I believe they're still around today. As just Nelson's. Again, not sure how direct descendant of that they are. Now, they advertise their radium water as a simple and inexpensive home treatment for gout, rheumatism, or arthritis. Ambrecht was actually one of the first companies or the first stockists in Britain to actually have a supply of radium bromide. So they absolutely did have access to it and were producing their radium water. They also marketed a radium soap, which was said to be for all skin affections or afflictions even. Um, I also note that they also had a cocaine wine at some point as well. It's really interesting looking at what they were producing. A little bit, well, I was going to say a little less medicinal, but obviously beauty products are medicinal. They are, so we have here, we've got radioactive water from a company called Radium, or Helen Cavendish's Radium. She's a beauty salon owner in Mayfair, New Bond Street, and we've got an advert here and some bottles that are in my collection as well. So around about 1915, she starts marketing herself as a specialist in radioactive toilet preparations. She says that her Radium is a scientific radium preparation which, when applied to the roots of the hair, it stimulates the pigment glands, invigorates the scalp, and restores colour in a natural way. We've got other examples as well. So we've got the Radium Salt Company of London, who produced radium bath salts. This was from 1914. So this is a radioactive salt that dissolves in your bath. The company takes out a number of patents in France, America, and the UK for improved means for rendering water radioactive. And they advertise extensively in the Chemist and Druggist, as well as the Daily Express, the Bystander as well. So these are big companies that are advertising to the public, but also to pharmacists and chemists and druggists, of course, as well. Rabasar strengthens the nerves, dispels uric acid, and tones up the whole system. Also, rheumatic pains disappear. Um, we also see radioactive materials being used as sort of stuffing as well. So we have the O-radium hat pad, which is a silk pad filled with radium of some description, which was sold with the instructions simply secure the O-radium pad permanently to the lining of your hat. And the result is that whenever you're wearing your hat, you're subjecting your hair to beneficent rays. Sorry, struggle with that word. We also have Radior, who are dealing with wrinkles here. So you have got your forehead pad, your under chin pad. They had lots of other different pads you could put to various parts of your body that would use radium to, as we can see here, the first section, strengthen the tiny muscles of the face. So this is intended for strengthening facial muscles, eliminating wrinkles, crow's feet, and sagging skin. Radior also has a line of cosmetics from about 1916 as well, including lipsticks and face powders and all sorts of things. They were stocked in places like Boots the Chemist, but also Harrods, Selfridges, and the Army and Navy store. Now, this is really a free market at the moment. There's no restrictions on purchasing radium products. And whilst this is a time when the BMA, for example, have pre-packaged medicines firmly in their sites, there's little that they can do, or indeed little appetite that they have for regulating the sale of radium, other than the concerns around the amount that was in circulation and trying to protect that for mainstream medical use. And by that, I mean use in hospitals. So radium, for instance, wasn't considered a poison, so it wasn't regulated under any pharmacy acts. And whilst it was still not really understood, it was still widely believed that it was a good thing in general. This is a real sort of wishy-washy period in terms of regulating the use of radium. BMA does do some investigating into it, and they're particularly interested in looking at these radium salves that are coming up, and there's lots of different companies that are producing them. So they're interested in the radium salves. They're also interested in uranium wine as well. So we see uranium wine being talked about in the 1909 BMA secret remedies. They confirmed that they had analysed it and that it was made from alcohol, glycerine, cane sugar, ash, and an amount of uranium nitrate. The 1912 second follow-up book for that looks at Dr. Shower's radium salve, which we can see here, and also Dr. Sauermann's radium salve as well, another of those varieties. Now, both of these claim to positively affect or fully cure a host of conditions. So we know that from the BMA analysts, and that at least in the case of Sauermann's salve, now they did actually contain radium. They claimed that they got their radium from Austria. BMA gets Frederick Soddy, who's then a lecturer on physical chemistry and radioactivity at the University of Glasgow, to analyse Sauermann's salve. He reports back, I have received the 2 pots of radium salve that you sent me. The alpha radioactivity of the preparation is just detectable, and it's about 100 parts of that, or uranium. Now, this is enough to satisfy the BMA that the product contains at least trace amounts of radioactivity. And this is their concern here, because they're concerned whether the products are actually radioactive or not, whether it's radioactive or contains radioactive elements. So they're interested in the quantity and quality of it, not whether something has it being a bad thing or not. So they're really interested in that the amounts that are being claimed by the manufacturers actually match the amounts that are found. So this is why we get all of these analysis of these products. However, I mean, it's very unpredictable at this moment how much each product would have, even if it did have it in it, because obviously some of them don't have any in it at all. And there's no international radium standard at the time, so there's no measurement of radioactivity in terms of products like this. Production is not standardized. Laboratories had all developed their own individual methods for measuring it. So it's only around about 1913 that you get that radium standard, an international way of measuring the radioactivity of something. And this is still, at this time, being largely used for scientific research rather than commercial preparations. Now, we see a flurry of concerns in 1914 about the use of radioactivity, and a series of articles beginning to appear in publications such as The Times and Nature and the Daily Express. They're urging caution to consumers. They're talking about the inconsistency of radium content. Now, this is largely framed as a financial problem. The idea that people are paying a great deal of money for these products, but actually the amount of radium in them, the amount of radioactivity that registers in them is so little that it cannot possibly be beneficial. Um, and beneficial has actually no therapeutic benefits. One of these articles, it says the writer concludes that it cannot be too strongly insisted upon that unless a properly attested guarantee of radioactivity is forthcoming, no value should be attached to any claims set forth. Now, this in turn obviously draws the ire of some manufacturers of radium products. Now, they are understanding their work in many cases to be just as important as the work that's being carried out in hospitals and laboratories. So we have a response to the Times in particular articles here, Radium Perils, Quack Radium Remedies, from A.E. Deutsch, I think, I don't know how you pronounce his name. Now, he was associated with a mining company in Cornwall who supplied Roscoe natural radioactive water to chemists and pharmacists. He writes to his MP to protest against the injustice of these claims, of these articles. He also raises some interesting points. He raises points about the legitimacy of his products and others like it in the context of the medical practices of the time. He says, I must say that the article referred to deprecates even the use of radium water, but against this are the facts of radium water being sold by the Radium Institute, Ombrack Nelson and Company, Martindale, and many others, inapproachable firms. Also, that there are numerous achievements from the use of radium water that have been reported in the home and foreign press. And we find that many such reports emanate from Sir Frederick Treves, Dr. Lazarus Barlow, Dr. Hayward Pink, and others. Surely these firms and persons are not quacks. Now we start seeing various methods of legitimizing radium products, including guarantees being introduced at this time. Rabar Sar guarantees that each box of their product would contain a definite and uniform proportion of radium salts. Dr. Sauberman produces adverts saying radium quackery and how to avoid it. So we start seeing everyone sort of going against each other, saying, well, my products are the right ones. We do have radium. It's the right amount of radium as well. We have Sparklet, Spar Radium as well. They guaranteed their radium content through a numbered certificate issued by the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington. The NPL held the Britain's radium standard and offered this as a fee. So we see lots of discussions, of course, around about this time. There are a series of documents in the National Archives, again from 1914, that address the concerns raised in the press. They also recommend that radium should be included in the British, I can never say oh my God. I've forgotten how to say it. It should be scheduled as a poison, essentially. So the Home Office concludes that this isn't something they can act on at this time, so they can't get involved in radium products. So they say that it's not their job to sort out. Any addition to the poison list would need to be a resolution by the Pharmaceutical Society, and nothing is done. And this is what happens because we get to the First World War. And what we see here is radium not being controlled, the medical use of radium is not being controlled in the public interest as such. It's being held for the medical use. So there's a Radioactive Substances Control Order of 1918, which limits the amount of radioactive substances that is allowed in public hands. So we just see radium and radioactive substances being made use for hospitals only, especially military hospitals, for treatments. Now, when it's suspended in 1919, we see a period where radium is much more commercially available. So we see a lot more products being in use in the 1920s, and they're being marketed along the same lines. They are the same sort of products. But by the 1930s, we see interest in it sort of beginning to tarnish. This is particularly in the case of the Radium Girls, US factory workers who painted watch dials and faces with radium paint. Because their factories encouraged tipping or pointing, you can see in the image here, actually making a fine point with your mouth. That meant they were ingesting huge amounts of radium, and many women died or were made very ill from radiation poisoning. We also have the case of Eben Byers, who drank bottles and bottles of Radithor, which promised to be effective against 150 diseases. It called itself sunlight in a bottle. Eben Byers dies horribly of radiation poisoning in 1933. Now, we see a huge amount of publicity around the death. Even Byers is American, he dies in America, but it's publicity all over the world. And we see a lot of worry about these radioactive products, these radium products. We have Viscount Lee of Fareham, at the time chair of the National Radium Commission. He gives the Sylvanus Thompson Memorial Lecture for 1932 at the British Institute for Radiology, and he expresses the attitude of the Commission and denounces the sale of radium remedies. He says the credulous public is being flooded with advertisements of quack radium remedies. The preparation or sale of radioactive preparations designed for either internal or external use should be absolutely prohibited. Now, this is reported on by the press, but it's not received well in all quarters, of course. We still have advocates for these radium treatments. Now, they're fixated on explaining how the death of Byers was a one-off caused by his extreme levels of radioactive consumption. He was drinking 3 bottles of this a day, when it was far above what was actually being recommended. Spa directors were claiming that their waters were fine. These are naturally radioactive waters. We see people like Felix Trina, who manufactured the radium vitae emanator. This is a pencil-like device that was designed to be placed in a glass of water to infuse that water with radioactivity. He noted the safety of his type of product. He says there can be no danger or ill effect through accumulation because radon is completely eliminated from the skin within a period of 6 hours. We still see little about it being done in either the US or the UK. In the US, the AMA withdraws its recommendation for the internal use of radium, but that's about it. France does actually do something. They follow recommendations from a range of professional associations, and a decree is issued reclassifying radium as a controlled substance under Schedule A poisonous substances. This legislation applies not only to medical preparations, but also to everyday consumer goods that have been rendered radioactive. And its scope extends to body care, beauty, and toiletries as well, not just internal medicines. Now, under these new regulations, such items could only be prescribed by a physician and dispensed to the public upon presentation of a medical prescription. Each product was required to bear a label with the manufacturer's name and address, and the prescription was assigned a serial number that had to be recorded in a special register. It also had to have a label, a red-orange label that was prominently displayed on the product with the words poison and external use. Now, this, of course, has a real effect on the radium products that are on sale in France at the time. I've just got a few up here as well. The most famous of which is this faux radio powder that you can see in the big image here. This is, as you can see, a base of radium and thorium prepared by a Dr. Alfred Curie. They've even got the formula on the bottom. It contains radium bromide and thorium sulfate. It's a really interesting history about looking at how a particular product, or how this radium in this specific instance or how they rebranded after the main ingredient of this had been basically disallowed by government intervention. So that's a really interesting aspect. But I'm going to move on. So we're heading to wartime again, and there we see a huge focus once again on preserving the radium that is in existence for hospital use. We also see something else happening here, because in the intervening years, the importance of uranium had increased once again. Now it's all being fed into the atomic bomb project, the Manhattan Project. The UK had signed an agreement with the US, which meant that any uranium that the UK had, and specifically as well as in the US, was being primarily allocated to produce bombs and research into atomic energy. So essentially, no more commercial use of uranium, and therefore radium as well. Now, a lot of manufacturers got really frustrated with this. Now, uranium is in huge demand, and a whole industry is made to increase the demand and get the public involved with feeding the atomic bomb project, and then following that, the nuclear energy project as well. So we see I mean, this is a fantastic and interesting period of time. The US government is encouraging a uranium rush amongst its population. There's huge bonuses for producing for finding sources of uranium. There's an obsession with becoming a uranium heir, either by finding uranium or trading uranium penny stocks. This leads to a uranium mania with songs, books, games, and all sorts of fascinating cultural artifacts that is easy to become obsessed with. But I do want to keep on to our topic because I am aware that I will be, I'm sure, going over time. Now, part of this uranium rush meant the discovery of uranium mines, of course. Now, some of these are better than others. And for those with poor uranium mines, not highly active sources of uranium, they had to come up with other ways of monetizing it. They were not going to get the government bonus for a weak form of uranium. So we see a move away from the waters and the radon infused waters and all pills and creams, and we see a real move to inhalation, but also the radioactive pads, which we've seen already. Now we have the Free Enterprise Mine in Boulder, Colorado. Now this features in both Time and Life magazine in 1952, and it has its dynamic owner, Wade V. Lewis. He tells the initial discovery of uranium, and then in 1951, his mine was visited by a wife, this is the legend, a husband and a wife from Los Angeles. During the visit, a joke was made about the potential of the uranium's radioactivity to cure the woman's bursitis in this issue. The next day, according to this company legend, she called up and said that she'd been cured. So news of this recovery spread, and soon the mine starts receiving many health visitors. So many, in fact, said they were forced to close down the mine and transform it into a health centre, installing lighting and an elevator to transport patients down. This all cost $50,000. In June 1952, they opened for business, charging $10 per visit. And the idea here is that you're sitting, as you can see this image here, sitting and inhaling the radon gas that's being given off by the uranium ore within the mine itself. There were also tunnels, sitting houses, and uranitoriums. I don't even know if I pronounced that right, but all these places where you can sit and access uranium. We have sorry. We also have take-home products as well, things that can be bought in pharmacies too. So you didn't have to, once again, actually visit these places to enjoy the benefits. We have a man called Blair Burwell, who was known as Mr. Uranium. He was manager of the Climax Uranium Company, and they sold their tailings, their rubbish, their refuse almost, to manufacturers for use in rheumatism pads. Again, another very popular use. So we have the Wonder Pad here. This is a page from the American Medical Association's Quack archives. There's a huge folders about uranium treatments in there. So we have the Wonder Pad range, Wonder Gloves and Wonder Pad boots for sleeping or lounging. We've got the Grames as well at the end, which was marketed as a personal radioactive uranium comforter, your own health mine in miniature, and the Cosmos radioactive pad. So we're seeing it again, but the 1950s is very different. As I said, we're starting seeing the AMA much more on it in terms of denouncing this radon therapy as a medical hoax. But still, we can also see that the AMA and other medical authorities are struggling to contain and control this still growing market. And as I said, there's a huge amount in their archives, hundreds of inquiries from members of the public, physicians, and newspapers trying to find out about these uranium treatments. The AMA are testing as many products as they can, and they're sharing the results in their publications. They're very dismissive over the uranium sitting houses. They deemed it fascination for the gullible is the only known effect of uranium tunnels. The Wonder Pad was deemed worthless and a fake medicine pitch. It does not contain uranium or any other radioactive material, but was filled with chunks of rock and pulverized dirt. But there's still little they can do. They did refer suspicious products to federal organizations such as the Post Office Fraud Division for products shipped by mail, or for the US Food and Drug Administration if they believed it was misbranded. But in many cases, the radioactivity is deemed too low to be hazardous. So it's actually the misbranding tactic that is more successful. Um, in the UK, we have the Radioactive Substance Act of 1948, which limits the sale and supply of radioactive substances to practitioners licensed to handle them, to persons acting on their direction, to pharmacists, and to authorized sellers of poisons. This required registration of all businesses that had radium or uranium production facilities for the first time. Now, the obligation of that registration and regulation closed down many of these companies or many of these consumer medical product companies because it was simply too much for them. A lot of them were very small organizations. So we see a lot of closures at this time. We also see here the Q-ray electro radioactive dry compress. They were also a victim of this change of regulations. They'd been launched in the mid 1930s, but had an I would say epic battle after the Radioactive Substances Act to secure their production of these products. This was actually a big company, and you can find these Q-rays quite often. Someone emailed me today saying they'd found one in their off in a building that they owned, and what should they do about it? They come up fairly often, um, but again, they had to stop using radio. They had to stop as a company because they just simply couldn't get the radioactive materials anymore because all of it was this at this point being used for the UK nuclear program. So we see two things happening here. We see treatments using uranium, radium, or radon being officially regulated and being considered to be now to be absolute quack cures by this point. Medicine has basically moved on and got better. But we see the mainstream medical use of artificially created radioactive isotopes just beginning at this point. Now, this had been developed in the 20s, but accelerated by the Manhattan Project. And we start seeing the mass production of them and distribution of them by government agencies, especially in the US as part of what became known as the Atoms for Peace program. So between the 1950s and 70s, this really represents a crucial phase for the evolution of nuclear medicine. In the US, they had the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, the Atomic Drugstore, as it was known. Now, this provided radioisotopes for research, therapy, and industry. In the UK, we had the isotope division at Harwell. This is a picture actually of the production lab, and I found this in a collection of the Science Museum. It's dated to 1950. Now, radiotherapy had evolved in the 20s and 30s. But the cost and rarity of radium salts really remained a barrier to medical experimentation. We also see concerns around its safety as well, both for the practitioners and for the patients. And these are raised regularly over the time. So we see intense research activity for the creation of radiopharmaceuticals, the chemical compound that contains a radioactive isotope and can be used to diagnose or treat various diseases. 1940s, we get early use of it for diagnostics like thyroid imaging with iodine 131, and the first radiopharmaceuticals were commercialized in 1950. The first are relatively simple, but obviously gets more complex. So we have iodine, we have radioactive gold being injected into leukemia and cancer patients by 1958. And then we see the use of radioisotopes and radiopharmaceuticals in diagnostic medicine being really developed after this point. It's better for many reasons. Unlike radium, which has a half-life of 1,600 years, the majority of radioisotopes have a short half-life, do not concentrate in the bones, and do not release those hugely damaging alpha particles. Um, it's really difficult to find images of radioisotopes. I thought I'd almost leave you with this wonderful image from the cosmetic company Dorothy Gray. They are using tracers here. So this is radioactivity being used as a tracer. And here they're using it they're using it to test how well their cold cream removes makeup by making some soil radioactive and then placing it on the face of a woman and then using different types of creams to remove it. And they prove that Dorothy Gray's Salon Cold Cream is the most effective at using of removing dirt or by extension, makeup, using a Geiger counter afterwards to see how much radioactivity is left on the woman's face after various use of various soaps and creams. There's a fantastic advert on YouTube that actually shows this advert. It's slightly terrifying. No, this is a real period for all things atomic, and just like when we saw the uranium and radium before, we see an atomic mania. But we see something slightly different as well, because we see a reevaluation of how much non-essential radiation people are willing to expose themselves on a day-to-day basis. This is all increased around nuclear tests of the 50s and 60s, and even questioning at the same time the use of X-rays as well, and those radioisotopes in mainstream medicines. So we see all sorts of things happening into the late 1950s, into the late 1960s. We see the Windscale site fire in 1957 in Britain, and that resulting release of radioactive contamination. We see concerns around the genetic implications of exposure to radioactivity as well, which basically leads to the US National Academy of Sciences and the British Medical Research Council recommending the linear no threshold model be established. Basically, that there's no safe level of radiation. Of course, radiotherapy is still very much in use today. We see the expansion of the radiopharmaceuticals and nuclear medicine for diagnosis and for various treatments in the 1980s, and the introduction of targeted radiopharma, which delivers radiation directly to cancer cells, minimizing damage to healthy cells in the 90s. And really, this is where we sort of leave this talk, because we don't see as many radium products as we used to. As I said, by the late 1930s and into the late 1940s as well, there just isn't access to these. There's just not as much access to radioactivity to the casual entrepreneur or even most medicine companies either. One thing that they don't that is still in existence, however, is the amount of radon baths that are still around. Now, these have still remain largely protected from regulations because it's a natural product, so it doesn't fall under the remit of the Radioactive Substances Act. Many British spa towns still continue to market their radioactive waters into the 1950s, and largely we see it ending with Windscale in 1957. That seems to be enough for people. They redo their marketing materials, simply drop any mention of radium in their waters and sort of go on to the next thing. But it's not just that, it's because it stopped being of service. And I think that is the main point of this. It's not that anyone got particularly horrified at any point. It is that just things moved on. Fashion moved on, trends moved on, manias moved on, but also medicine moves on as well. And in particular with the radium water, it's not only is it not fashionable anymore, it's been subsided by other medical advancements, and reliance on water treatments and visitors to spas had dramatically declined in the interwar years, as conditions such as polio, tuberculosis, and diphtheria were gradually conquered by the widespread use of vaccines. However, I wanted to end on this picture of me in Bad Gastein in Austria in 2019, but I've also had a radon treatment in Yakimov, that town where Marie Curie got her pitch blende from. There's also a uranium tunnel in Austria that is on my list of places to go. So it's a wonderful. It looks like it's miles under the mountain, and you go and sit and breathe in radon. And the Free Enterprise mine that we saw from the 1950s is also still in existence as well. So that's me. Thank you so much for listening today. If you want to hear from me again, sign up to my newsletter. There's other ways to keep in touch, either a link tree or that QR code there. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can work out how to do that. And then if there's any questions, do you have time? Oh, a little bit over, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Sorry, that was a rip-roaring through millions of years of history in the end.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was absolutely fascinating. And I'm just going to enable people to unmute for themselves and indeed to turn on their video if they like. So it's nice to see people's faces. And I'm also going to remove you from the spotlight so we can see everybody. So that was absolutely fantastic canter through. I have to say, I had no idea of the richness about history. And I have to say, as a museum curator, I'm glad I only have to look after curare and strychnine and opium and not have to deal with the hidden dangers. And I have a couple of questions for you to kind of kick off with before I invite the audience to join in. And so one is, I mean, if you did find one of these things at the back of your cupboard or your grandmother's cupboard, what are you meant to do with one of these radioactive kits?
I mean, most of them are, I mean, I run a website called the Museum of Radium, and that's where I share items from my collection. And so I also keep that up as somewhere that people can email if they find something.
Hmm.
Um, and I do get a lot of emails. It's mostly from people who find like they in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. I think there was a brand of shoe polish that was called Radium. So people find these bottles of and ink as well. So they find these liquid bottles that say Radium on and are incredibly scared. And often I'm able to say, no, that's absolutely fine. That's shoe polish. Do not worry about it, my lovelies. But you do. I mean, like I said, this morning I got an email from someone who'd found a Q-ray. Now, Q-rays are, and I will just show my little box here because I like to have a little show and tell. Q-rays are actually seriously scary, depending on when they were made. I've got this one is this came by a radio chemist who managed to get rid of everything for me. Um, the Science Museum had one, for instance, and they got rid of it because they were like, no, we don't need this in our collection. They're pretty scary. So I always say to people, come email me and I'll advise. So much depends on the area that you live in. I know a few people that will be able to come and pick up and remove them if needs be, but there's so few of them that actually are proper scary. But Q-ray is one, the sparklets, which was the gas canisters that had radioactivity that made sparkling water. They're seriously scary as well. I had some of those for a while. Very strong stuff. But I've tested quite a few of these objects. Yeah, very low levels. I'm obviously not someone who's, I mean, I go and have radon baths. I'm not incredibly worried about this stuff myself. But yeah, get in
So
touch with me. I'll take things, is what I
do
say.
you keep a Geiger counter at home?
I do not actually. No, but nothing is strong or dangerous enough, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other than when I give talks, I don't sit next to the stuff. I probably shouldn't. You should see,
Yeah.
I've got my little. See, I've got things in little bags. This was given to, and I went and got this tested at the University of Nottingham. That's a face powder that is not radioactive. There's no radioactive materials in it, but I like the little bag. I just leave that.
So in fact, the fact that a lot of people are being ripped off was a good
Yes.
thing in this instance.
Yes, but also some of it is, a lot of the ones that I have are bottles. So they were that was radon. Radon has a half-life of 3 days. So, that's
Mhm.
not going to be dangerous to people. Um, yeah, I mean, a lot of it is being ripped off, but a lot of it is not understanding as much about it as we do today. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I kept finding in my research, and I'm sure other people, and I see a few names of people who I know look at these types of products as well. A lot of these people are really doing it. They really do believe this stuff works. They really are sure of themselves and are not trying to rip people off. It's just that they often lack the understanding about what they're doing.
Yeah, and I'm sure some really interesting parallels to other forms of medicine. So I'd like to invite anyone in the audience. Probably you can either put a message in the chat bar, or if you go to React in the bottom line of your screen, you can put up your hand, and I will see that and invite you to unmute yourself and to speak with a question. And while you're thinking, I do have another question for you, Lucy. Do you, of the wide range of stuff that's floating around, a lot of the sort of quack treatments that came up with the pandemic, is there any kind of current fad, let us say, for treatments, but you think that in 50 or 100 years' time we might look back on and think it has quite odd parallels to this story?
I think everything does, doesn't it? I mean, we see so many uh, obs obsessions over things. I mean, when I was finishing writing that Radium book and I was doing the editing on that William Morton and his Liquid Sunshine, it was right about the time that Trump was talking about sunshine in the body and drinking bleach and, destroying COVID uh, internally that way. And it is really fascinating seeing all of that stuff happening again and again and again. But yeah, anything that you see that people get really obsessed about starts getting, what's the word? It just starts getting out of control, doesn't it? I mean,
Mm,
anything that you can think about. I was talking to someone today about obsession with protein, for instance, and how that obviously has parallels with other historical food fads as well. But also, then we've got Kennedy now saying about there's a war on protein, and it's just all the same sort of thing, whether it's medicinal or food or cosmetics. It's just the same thing happening again and again and again, isn't it?
yeah,
But as for any particular treatment or any particular ingredient that I'm particularly wary of, no, actually. I think I have a healthy concern about everything.
yeah. Great. Okay, thank you. I don't see a hands up, so I think in that case we also know we can go to Lucy's books to follow up on this fascinating topic. And I think we're going to wrap up by reminding people we have our annual conference in Edinburgh in early May, and then the 15th of June, another really interesting talk by two of our committee members on the Museum of the uh, uh, British, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, and indeed the society itself, which is in a transition at the moment to being a Royal College of Pharmacy. It's a very interesting time. We have Catherine Walker and Stuart Anderson to talk to us about that. But thank you very much. Real bumper audience this evening, 33. Reminder, you can always catch up on all of our talks, including this one, on our YouTube channel. And thank you again, Lucy, for that absolutely fantastic talk. And
Thank
goodbye, everybody.